During times of systemic breakdown within the system, the inherent systemic risk prompts individuals to flock toward gold and silver. However, what does this scenario entail? What instances hinder our ability to assist individuals in navigating such breakdowns and continuing the reliance on us as dealers, especially when the system itself is faltering?
I have been trading gold and silver for 33 years, even when it was undervalued at $252 per ounce and $3 to $4 per ounce for silver. Over these years, I've been accumulating these precious metals because they represent wealth to me. I'm not immensely wealthy like Bill Gates, so I couldn't buy up everything. However, I've consistently purchased gold and silver every 2 weeks. I passionately believe in its value. Whenever I hire employees, I stress the importance of buying regularly. It's a fundamental part of our approach. To me, that question seems incredibly naive. I've built this business from the ground up, starting with almost nothing, solely because I believed in something. It took me 33 years to reach a point where everyone acknowledged the value, yet even now, it constitutes only 0.5% of the total allocation in this country. Yes, I'm a firm believer in it, and I'm among the minority who do. I continue to buy it every 2 weeks because I consider it a pathway to financial freedom and salvation. When chaos ensues, I'll sell it without hesitation, separate from what I buy. I won't sell my personal stash, but I'll keep selling until I can't anymore. Regarding the system's breakdown, if the COMEX fails, nobody will be able to hedge their inventory for a certain period until a solution arises. Holding inventories will become detrimental if money stops flowing. We might need to halt operations until normalcy resumes. It's terrifying to even consider such scenarios, but they're a realistic possibility. Talking about motivation, people are driven by both greed and fear. Over the last couple of decades, greed has predominantly motivated people. However, what I witnessed recently, people calling me in the dead of night, expressing sheer terror, reveals that fear is a potent motivator, especially when things start falling apart. We've lived in an era where it was assumed we'd live better than our parents and grandparents, but that perception might be changing. The belief that markets will always bounce back isn't necessarily true. Look at what it took to revive the market from its lowest point. An $8 trillion expansion of the Fed balance sheet, invested in interest-bearing assets like U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, artificially lowered interest rates, making the stock and housing markets appear more robust than they actually are. It's all a facade. When this facade crumbles, the dependency on credit in our system becomes glaringly evident. The entire chain, from a loaf of bread's production to its sale in a grocery store, relies heavily on credit. If credit dries up, the entire system collapses. The bullishness driven by easy money and abundant credit will flip into a highly bearish scenario when credit tightens, as I strongly anticipate. The signs are already visible, with $2 trillion in the overnight repo market signaling banks' reluctance to lend in a fragile economy. The FDIC's warnings in November should have been taken seriously. It was a wake-up call. The fear I've witnessed in people's voices over the past few days mirrors what I believe will unfold. It might happen suddenly, possibly over a weekend. I've always believed that if the BRICS make an announcement, it will be on a quiet Sunday night, resulting in market downturns across the board and a paradigm shift when Saudi Arabia and OPEC decide to adopt a commodity-backed currency with the BRICS nations. This change is imminent. Yesterday's events were a precursor to what might come. Their actions were possibly an attempt to prevent us from teetering over the brink. I wouldn't be surprised if they're covertly injecting liquidity into struggling banks as our dollar's value diminishes more and more.
Back to the question about was the metal that should have been coming out of the mint, one of the most popular forms of metal in the last 3 years, coming out of the U.S. Mint, hasn't come out of the mint since 1964. And that's junk silver, 90% constitutional silver currency. Anonymous says, Andy, do you have any ballpark estimate of how much, quote, junk silver has been melted down over the years and how much has survived?
I have no idea, but I'll tell you that I have standing orders for $1 million worth right now, and I really can't find any. We sold a bunch recently, and I had a lot of it, but this is always, to me, an indication of what the supply is like. Why? Because you can't reproduce something that hasn't been made since 1964. Well, what happens if the mints go out offline? A couple of them. Even if you realize there are 6 major mints of the world, and when they shut down or go offline, that's it. You got a handful of refineries, but they can't keep up. What's the old saying? You never realize how much you value something until it's gone. Well, people take for granted. And oftentimes, lately, I find myself thinking, even late at night, like, why are the mints selling their gold? Why are these countries doing it? I could see that stopping. You asked me what could put me out of business. The mint's saying, we need to nationalize all of our countries, gold and silver. It needs to be held by the government. And I would think they would do that before they would confiscate it. When countries like China and Russia are promoting it to their citizens in this country, so few people own it, it wouldn't make sense to do that. But I could see the mints just not selling to the West anymore, or just keeping it for their own citizens, or whatever it is that they're doing. I think about that a lot lately, like where we're going. What is the likelihood that they continue to release Australian kangaroos or UK Britannias or South African Krugerrands? Isn't it in their best interest to not? We've lived at a period of time that was orderly and systematic, and if that all breaks down, then, I think this is a lot more than it used to be. And fortunately, the people who have listened to you, Donegan, for quite some time, and even when you were reluctant preppers, I love that name. No one prepares willfully. Most people prepare reluctantly, because they don't want to think about the potential. Just like filling out a life insurance application, you do it reluctantly. You don't want to think about your own mortality. Well, wake up. We're all going to die. And all good things come to an end, including the World Reserve Standard. And this is something that when it happens overnight, everything will change. There will be no metal left. The public will be caught off guard, because, as that person said earlier, where's the media through all of this? Why aren't they telling us? Why don't you ever hear that Social Security is $76 trillion in debt? Why don't people know how big a trillion is?